Everything is sparkling clean when it's washed in a hot point.
We are having a big summer trade-in sale with fantastic allowance.
It's the most useful appliance I ever had in my home.
They promise to change our lives forever. Gleaming, humming machines built into the heart of the American dream. Only to vanish, unloved, into dusty garages and forgotten basements. What did we lose when these vintage appliances failed? And why does it still feel personal? The Toto Later was one of those appliances that promised to revolutionize breakfast forever. The conveyor belt design made it feel like you were living in the future, right in your own kitchen. Just place your bread on one side, and it would slowly glide through to the other, warm and golden. Except, more often than not, it came out burnt, limp, or not toasted at all. The mechanism jammed constantly, the heating elements were unpredictable, and the thing would overheat after a single use. In an era where innovation felt patriotic, people forgave a lot. But the truth is, it quickly became a hassle no one wanted to deal with before coffee. Still, it sat proudly on the counter, humming along with its cheerful chrome glow, because it represented something bigger: hope, style, progress. It was less a toaster and more a monument to mid-century optimism. That optimism eventually wore out, just like its motor, and the Toto Later found its way to yard sales, attic corners, and nostalgic memory. But ask anyone who had one. They will not forget the sound of it, the smell of it, or the feeling that for a moment their kitchen was a little ahead of its time. Frigidaire Ice Crusher refrigerator looked like the kind of luxury only seen in the magazines. With its sparkling chrome accents, soft pastel tones, and a futuristic ice crusher built right in, this refrigerator was a showpiece. Housewives marveled at the convenience of crushed ice on demand. A real marvel in an era where entertaining at home meant everything. But the dream quickly melted into frustration. The ice crusher jammed constantly, spraying half-frozen shards into awkward clumps or refusing to work altogether. It made a terrible noise, like a blender chewing gravel. And worse, it often leaked inside the freezer, creating icy messes that ruined everything from fish fillets to frozen pies. Repairmen made their rounds, scratching their heads at the complicated mechanisms while assuring folks it was just a kink to work out. But the kink never went away. It became a kind of cold-hearted family member, temperamental, but always there. And when it finally gave out, it left behind more than broken parts. It left behind the memory of a time when having crushed ice felt like living in the future, even if that future came with puddles. Microwave browner or broiler trays arrived with one loud, sizzling promise. You could brown meat in the microwave. No more soggy leftovers, no more half-baked chicken. The little metallic trays claimed to harness microwave magic to crisp, sear, and deliver that golden finish everyone craved. Except they rarely delivered. Meat came out gray, edges curled instead of crisping. And worse, the trays got dangerously hot, sometimes warping or cracking entirely. Still, the 80s were an age of kitchen experimentation, and these trays felt like the future. Moms gave them a fair shot, hoping to make pork chops or meatloaf without firing up the oven. But within weeks, most of these browning trays ended up shoved in the back of the cabinet next to the ice cream maker and the never-used fondue pot. Ask someone who had one, and they might laugh, because nothing about those meals was ever crispy. But they remember trying, because for one hopeful dinner, it felt like maybe, just maybe, this tray would save the day. It did not. Electric can openers built into countertops were once the pride of high-end kitchen design. They looked sleek, modern, and promised effortless convenience. Just push a button, and your can of peaches or condensed milk opened itself while you leaned back like royalty. But the reality was far messier. They jammed constantly, blades dulled quickly. And when they broke, because they always broke, they were nearly impossible to fix. Built directly into the counter or the cabinet, they could not just be replaced like a handheld model. They became kitchen dead weight. Worse, food splatter would collect in the mechanism, turning it into a breeding ground for grime. People started using them less and less until eventually they forgot they were even there. But for a while, This was the height of kitchen automation. And yet, for a short time, pressing that button felt like living in a house of the future. It felt like progress, even if what you got was a lid half cut and a countertop stained with tomato sauce. In the end, these can openers taught people something important. Just because something looks built-in does not mean it should be. Built-in wall coffee makers were supposed to be the final word in kitchen luxury. The idea was elegant: coffee at the press of a button. No more clutter on the countertop, no more messy grounds. They were sleek, space-saving, and made your kitchen feel like the inside of a first-class airplane. But once installed, reality came knocking. They leaked, they gurgled, they brewed lukewarm, watery coffee that tasted like disappointment. Cleaning them was a nightmare. The water reservoirs were hidden deep inside cabinetry, and mildew quickly became an uninvited guest. Repairing them meant calling in a specialist, an expensive proposition for a cup of bitter drip. Yet people were enchanted by the idea. They proudly showed off their built-in marvels to guests, even as they quietly brewed their actual coffee in a countertop machine out of sight. Over time, these units became silent relics in otherwise modern kitchens. Some still sit in old houses today, yellowed by age, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and outdated hope. They were supposed to make mornings better. Instead, they taught people to be careful what they wished for, because nothing is worse than needing coffee and being betrayed by the very machine you trusted to deliver it. Rotisserie ovens for the home looked like the centerpiece of a kitchen that truly had it all. Spinning meat, golden and glistening behind a glass panel, promised restaurant-style meals without ever leaving your house. It was showy, dramatic, and felt like a little bit of television magic landed on your countertop. But the excitement quickly gave way to dread. These ovens took forever. They cooked unevenly. One side of the chicken would crisp, while the other side sagged and steamed. Grease splattered everywhere, dripping down into trays that were impossible to clean properly. And because they were bulky, they devoured counter space and collected dust when not in use, which was most of the time. Still, people wanted to believe. After all, what was more luxurious than carving a whole roast straight from a spinning spit? But that luxury came at a cost, and not just in electricity. It came in the form of undercooked dinners, burnt edges, and a smell that never quite left the kitchen. Eventually, most rotisserie ovens were shoved into storage or gifted to a cousin who loved to cook. They were kitchen theater, flashy, noisy, and mostly impractical. But for a moment in time, they made home cooks feel like gourmet chefs, even if the audience never clapped. Electric carving knives were once the most anticipated gift on a wedding registry. These buzzing blades of the future turned Sunday roasts and Thanksgiving turkeys into effortless feasts, or so the ads claimed. Every family had one, and every family had a story about using it exactly once. Loud, clunky, and corded, they felt more like a power tool than a kitchen utensil. You had to grip it with two hands and guide it like a jackhammer through even the softest meat. The serrated blades rattled your bones, and the results were rarely prettier than what a good kitchen knife could do in half the time. Still, there was a certain pride in pulling one out during holidays, like showing off your latest gadget. But most ended up buried in drawers, their long plastic cases gathering dust next to outdated cookbooks and tangled cords. Over time, people realized that finesse mattered more than noise, that a well-sharpened blade required no electricity and delivered far better slices. The electric knife, once a symbol of futuristic kitchens, became a relic of overcomplication. It was kitchen flair without the function. But if you ever hear that distinctive hum during Thanksgiving, you will know someone somewhere is still chasing the dream of slicing like a pro. Combination washer-dryer units sounded like the answer to every homemaker's prayers. One machine, one cycle, dirty to dry without needing to transfer a thing. It was the kind of solution that made magazine covers and won over appliance showrooms. But in practice, it was a whole different story. These early units were unreliable, took ages to run a full load, and often left clothes damp or steaming but not quite dry. Worse, If the washer broke, you lost your dryer too, and vice versa. Repairs were tricky, parts were rare, and service calls were expensive. Households quickly learned the hard truth. Just because two things can be combined does not mean they should be. Still, in a post-war world obsessed with space saving and streamlining, these machines symbolized a sleek, modern lifestyle. Apartment dwellers in particular clung to the dream, grateful for anything that spared them the laundromat. But frustration set in fast. Eventually, many people went back to the old two-machine method, realizing that reliability beat innovation every time. The combo washer-dryer promised convenience, but delivered compromise. And while today's versions are far more efficient, those early units left a damp impression on everyone who owned one. Trash compactors entered American kitchens like they were the final step in a fully modern home. Just step on the pedal, hear that mechanical grind, and watch your garbage shrink down to nothing. No more overstuffed bags or leaky bins. It felt like magic. But that magic turned sour quickly. The machines were loud, they reeked, and worst of all, they had a habit of breaking down after just a few months of use. Cleaning them was unpleasant at best, horrifying at worst. Food gunk, juices, and smells would cling to the interior like they had signed a lease. And if anything ever spilled inside, especially liquids, it became a slow-cooking disaster. Still, people loved the idea. Fewer trips to the outdoor bin, less visible mess. But the reality was far less glamorous. Most families stopped using them altogether, opting instead for traditional garbage bins and regular bags. It turned out that crushing trash did not make it disappear. It just made it harder to deal with. Eventually, the compactors were either removed entirely or left installed and unplugged, serving as weird metallic tombs for yesterday's dreams of domestic efficiency. They are still found in older kitchens, hiding behind cabinet doors, whispering of a time when garbage got its own machine. The Amana Raider range was a beast in every sense of the word. It was massive, expensive, and powerful enough to feel like you were cooking with radiation, which, technically, you were. When it debuted, it felt like something out of a science fiction movie. No more ovens, no more waiting, just press a button and zap, dinner was served, except that zap came with confusion, trial and error, and the occasional ruined meal. The Radar range was intimidating. It hummed like a generator and took up half the kitchen counter. Instruction manuals were thick, filled with warnings, and nobody quite knew how long to cook anything. Meat cooked unevenly, soup boiled over, and forget about metal, one spark, and you felt like you had summoned lightning. Still, people marveled at it. It was the future after all, even if it scared them a little. Eventually, sleeker, quieter, and more user-friendly models took over, but those early Radar ranges left their mark. They were not just appliances, they were conversation starters. They proved that Americans were willing to put up with a lot in the name of progress. Today, we take microwave convenience for granted, but back then, you had to earn it, with nerves of steel and a manual always nearby. Console stereos with built-in televisions were meant to be the crown jewel of the American living room. A massive wood-paneled cabinet that housed your television, radio, record player, and speakers all in one. Families gathered around them like modern campfires, the hum of tubes mixing with vinyl crackle and glowing cathode rays. It felt like having a spaceship parked in your home. But when the TV broke or the turntable stopped spinning, you were in trouble. These units were built like tanks, and just as hard to open. You could not swap out parts easily, and by the time repairmen were called, most just said it was better to buy new. Yet no one wanted to part with them. They were beautiful, heavy, familiar. They marked a moment when entertainment became furniture, not just a feature. Even after they stopped working, they stayed. A place to set your drink, a conversation piece, a memory machine. They became giant wooden tombs of nostalgia, too precious to toss, too broken to use. And every time you walked past one, you could still hear it faintly playing a warped record or buzzing with static. A ghost of the golden age of stay-at-home luxury, now buried under doilies and forgotten dreams. Reel-to-reel. Tape recorders were once the crown jewel of serious audiophiles. Nothing said you loved music more than giant magnetic reels spinning on chrome arms while smooth jazz or classical overtures filled the room. The sound was crisp, deep, richer than anything on vinyl. Or so people believed. But the machines were finicky. Threading the tape took patience and a steady hand. The slightest mistake could erase hours of music. Reels got tangled. Tapes snapped. Dust and humidity turned recordings into static mush. And just when you thought you had it mastered, along came the cassette. Smaller, easier, cheaper. Reel-to-reel loyalists held on, clutching their boxes of labeled reels, convinced the convenience of cassettes could never beat quality. But the world moved on. Record shops stopped stocking new tape. Repairmen vanished. And slowly, those once impressive machines turned into strange-looking relics of a more complicated age. They were too expensive to throw out, too outdated to use. So they sat in basements and hobby rooms, their reels stiff with time, their buttons quietly rusting. For a while, they were the future of sound. Then, almost overnight, they were not. Just another forgotten promise, too grand for the world it landed in. Popcorn poppers with stirring arms looked like magic when you first saw one. A clear dome, a spinning arm, and a promise of movie theater popcorn right on your kitchen counter. The advertisements showed perfect golden kernels tumbling into a bowl while families laughed and shared a Friday night together. But that vision popped just as fast as the first batch. These machines burned half the kernels, left the rest unpopped, and coated everything in uneven oil. The stirring arm often stalled or scraped the surface until it warped. Butter would splatter, plastic would yellow, and cleanup was a nightmare. Still, people gave them second and third chances, hoping they just needed to learn the timing. What they really learned was this: you cannot automate nostalgia. Popcorn tastes better when you stand over the stove, shaking the pot with your own two hands. These machines promised theater magic but gave you burnt disappointment and a sticky counter. Eventually, they were boxed up and forgotten, traded in for microwave bags and air poppers. But for a while, it felt like you had your own concession stand, even if the only thing consistent was the smell of scorched kernels. Dishwasher sink combos were early experiments in kitchen efficiency. Why have two appliances when you could build them into one sleek unit? At first glance, it made perfect sense. The sink and dishwasher shared plumbing, saved space, and seemed like the smartest thing to happen to kitchen design since the icebox. But in practice, it was more like forcing two incompatible roommates to live together. The sink worked fine on its own. The dishwasher did not. These units leaked, rattled, and took forever to clean even the smallest load. Because they were conjoined, fixing one meant dismantling the other. The result? A broken dishwasher and a half-working sink. Homeowners quickly realized they had paid more for less function, but pride kept them from admitting it. They kept washing by hand while the combo unit sat unused, humming weakly, reminding everyone of its supposed brilliance. And eventually, they were phased out, replaced by standalone machines that did their job without pretending to be something they were not. Still, that era was filled with bold ideas. Some just happened to flood your kitchen instead of improving it. Clothes folding machines were the kind of futuristic thinking that filled glossy magazine pages with excitement and envy. A machine that would fold your laundry for you? What housewife would not want that? Early concepts appeared at trade shows and in mid-century home expos with gleaming chrome panels and promises of domestic freedom. But they never quite made it into the average home. Why? Because they were massive, temperamental, and only worked with specific items, mostly towels and sheets. Try to feed them a blouse or a pair of jeans and they would seize up or crumple everything into a mess. They also cost a small fortune. And worst of all, they were slow. Slower than just folding it yourself. Still, the dream lingered. Some people invested, hoping the next model would be better. It never was. The clothes folding machine became a symbol of over-engineering, solving a problem no one really needed help with. And even though a few exist in commercial laundromats today, their household heyday never arrived. But every so often, someone still wishes for one. usually while staring at a towering pile of laundry and remembering when the future used to feel more exciting. The ropes and hot buttered corn popper sounded like a summertime dream, an electric device built to cook corn on the cob and coat it in melted butter at the same time. Just add water, pop in your cobs, and let it steam to perfection while rich butter drizzled from the top. But the dream boiled over fast. The machine was clunky, slow, and barely held more than 2 small ears at a time. It took forever to heat up. And the butter, well, meant to drizzle, often just dumped too much all at once or never released at all. Cleaning it was like cleaning a fondue pot with burnt sugar stuck to every surface. And for what? Something you could achieve in 5 minutes with a pot of boiling water and a brush of butter. Still, it had charm. The retro logo, the promise of gadget magic. But it ended up being more spectacle than solution. Most families used it once, maybe twice, before returning to the stove or grill. And yet, decades later, some people still remember it fondly, if only because it represented a time when even the simplest food was worth inventing a machine for. Built-in vacuum ports were hailed as the final answer to household dust. Instead of lugging around a vacuum cleaner, you could just sweep dirt to a small hole in the wall and watch it vanish like magic. Homes with these systems felt elite, futuristic, and effortlessly clean. But then came the breakdowns. The suction would weaken, the ducts would clog, and repair costs were sky high. The ports themselves would jam, whistle, or suck up small items never to be seen again. Worse, installing them often required tearing into walls and floors. Maintenance was a specialist's job, not a homeowner's fix. So when things went wrong, and they always did, families returned to their old vacuums with a sigh of defeat. And once cordless models hit the market, built-in systems became obsolete overnight. But for a while, it was the definition of modern. It made people feel like they had conquered household chores, even if the dust came back anyway. Vibrating belt exercise machines were the fitness miracle you did not actually have to break a sweat for. Just step onto the base, wrap a wide canvas belt around your waist, and flip the switch. The machine would vibrate violently, jiggling your hips, thighs, or backside until the calories supposedly melted away. It felt futuristic, it felt easy, it felt like a lie. These machines became iconic not for their results, but for how deeply they embedded themselves in the image of mid-century wellness. You saw them in women's magazines, television ads, and pastel-toned gym salons. But ask anyone who used one. It felt more like standing on a jackhammer than exercising. There was no actual resistance, no measurable effort, and certainly no long-term results. Yet they persisted, thanks to hope, novelty, and maybe a little bit of denial. Eventually, they were replaced by real workouts and actual science. But their memory lingers. In vintage photos, they look absurd now, strapped around housewives with perfect hair and polite smiles. They never delivered on their promise, but they did deliver a strange sense of belonging to the future. A quieter time when people truly believed that just standing still could be enough. Electronic frying pans with thermostats were marketed as precision tools for the home chef. No more guesswork, no more scorched pancakes or half-cooked sausages. You could set the temperature, trust the dial, and get perfect results, supposedly. These heavy electric skillets looked serious. They had glass lids, thick cords, and a kind of industrial charm that made them feel important. But in practice, they were awkward. Storing them was a challenge. Cleaning the electric base without soaking it was almost impossible, and most people found they just took up space. The thermostat often lagged, overheated, or underperformed, especially over time. Eventually, users gave up on fiddling with the dial and went back to using their regular pans. But for a stretch of years, these frying pans were a wedding gift favorite and a kitchen counter staple. You could make stir-fry, bacon, even stew in one, but only if you had the patience. When microwaves and non-stick pans entered the scene, the electric skillet quietly faded. Still, it was part of a moment when the kitchen became a playground for gadgets, and every time you see one at a thrift store, it feels like stumbling across someone's forgotten dream of the perfect breakfast. Avocado green and harvest gold appliances were not just appliances, they were statements. These colors were everywhere, and they were loud about it. Refrigerators, stoves, even dishwashers came dressed in these bold, earthy tones that were supposed to reflect nature, harmony, and warmth. But over time, they became a punchline. What was once fashionable started to look dated, dingy, and frankly, depressing. The colors clashed with everything. They made kitchens feel darker. And once trends shifted, people were desperate to paint over or rip them out. It did not help that these appliances aged poorly. The colors faded unevenly, showed every smudge, and made it harder to tell if something was actually clean. But for a moment, they defined the American home. These hues captured a unique confidence, the belief that color could change how we felt about cooking, cleaning, and daily life. They did not fail because they functioned poorly. They failed because style changed faster than they could keep up. Now, they live on in retro diners, ironic Instagram posts, and the occasional basement that time forgot. Yet somewhere, someone is still defending their avocado fridge, saying it has never let them down. Maybe they are right, but it still looks like guacamole gone wrong. Home intercom systems were supposed to bring families closer, without ever having to raise your voice. From the kitchen to the garage, from the upstairs hallway to the den, every room had a speaker, a button, and a little grill you could talk through. It was high-tech hospitality, straight out of the Jetsons. Parents loved the idea of calling kids down for dinner without climbing the stairs. But in reality, it rarely worked like that. The sound quality was awful. Static buzzed louder than words. Half the time, no one answered because they were not near the speaker or because they just did not feel like talking to a wall. The units would short out or one would get stuck open, blaring garbled noise until someone finally ripped out the fuse. Over time, people started ignoring them entirely, opting to shout the old-fashioned way. Still, the plastic boxes stayed mounted like little monuments to failed convenience. You can still find them in older homes, yellowed with age and filled with dust, a mute reminder of when we thought wires in every wall meant a smarter family. In the end, we did not need help talking to each other. We just needed to be in the same room. Television dinner. Warmers were born at the exact moment when America fell in love with eating in front of the television. The idea was simple. Slide your frozen meal, tin tray and all, into a specially sized device that would warm it perfectly. No oven needed. Housewives marveled at the sleek plug-in machines with compartments sized just right for Salisbury steak, mashed potatoes, and cherry cobbler. It felt futuristic, tidy, even indulgent. But it did not last. These warmers were slow, uneven. And once you pulled the tray out, parts were molten hot while others were still icy. Cleaning them was a greasy, frustrating experience. And if the foil tray touched the heating element, sparks, scorched plastic, dinner ruined, the arrival of microwave ovens sealed their fate almost instantly. Faster, cleaner, and more versatile, the microwave made the television dinner warmer look like a relic. They were boxed up, given away, or simply thrown out. Yet they remain one of those perfect snapshots in time, when dinner and television were two sides of the same cultural coin, and convenience came with chrome handles and a power cord. They did not fail because they were useless. They failed because the future showed up faster than anyone expected. Built-in. Ice cream makers were a luxury most families only dreamed about. The idea was delicious. Fresh, homemade ice cream from a machine built right into your kitchen cabinetry. No hand churning, no noisy motors in the garage. Just press a button and wait for creamy bliss. Except what you usually got was a mess. These early concept models had terrible insulation. The cooling elements struggled to maintain proper temperatures, and the end result was either slush or rock-hard crystal blocks. They were complicated to use, required pre-chilled parts, and often demanded a level of patience that few home cooks had. Maintenance? A nightmare. They had to be disassembled, cleaned, dried, and sometimes even lubricated to keep them running. And if they broke, which they often did, you were stuck with a non-functioning box taking up space under the counter. As the decades passed, countertop models got better, cheaper, and easier. Built-in versions vanished. But for a while, they represented the height of kitchen luxury, a promise of homemade joy baked into the bones of your house. They were not just about dessert. They were about identity, lifestyle, and showing the neighbors you had made it, even if what you made never actually tasted quite right. The Sunbeam Mixmaster with juicer attachment was the multitasker of its time. On its own, the Mixmaster was a reliable kitchen companion, beating eggs, mixing batters, and whipping cream like a champ. But then came the attachments. Suddenly, it could juice oranges, grind meat, even shell peas. At least, that is what the ads claimed. The juicer attachment in particular promised to turn your mixer into a citrus dynamo. But what it mostly did was make a pulpy, sticky mess. It wobbled. It leaked. The plastic warped under pressure. The yield was low and cleanup was dreadful. Still, people loved the idea. Kitchens were getting smarter, and versatility was king. The problem was, the Mixmaster was trying to be too much. Each new attachment chipped away at its dependability. Motors wore out, gears stripped, and eventually users started avoiding the add-ons altogether. They kept the base machine but quietly buried the attachments in kitchen drawers no one dared open. In a way, it was a victim of its own ambition. People did not want fewer machines. They wanted better ones. And the Mixmaster, for all its charm, simply could not do it all. Sometimes being great at one thing beats being mediocre at 5. The egg cuber might be the single strangest tool ever to grace a kitchen drawer. Its entire purpose? Turn a hard-boiled egg into a cube. That was it. No added flavor, no practical benefit. Just a square egg for your salad or sandwich. It was the kind of product that made you question how it even got made. But then you remember the 70s were full of odd culinary trends. People bought the egg cuber out of curiosity for parties, or just to impress guests with a perfectly stackable egg slice. The process was fiddly. Boil your egg, peel it while still warm, place it in the cuber, screw the lid down, and wait. And what you got was an egg, vaguely cube-shaped, with corners that looked more like dents. It did not last. Most broke after a few uses or got shoved to the back of a drawer next to melon ballers and avocado savers. Yet there is something undeniably charming about it. It reminds us that not all failures are sad. Some are just weird. The egg cuber failed because it never needed to exist. But in doing so, it became unforgettable. A punchline, a relic. And maybe, just maybe, the most wonderfully useless gadget ever made. The chamber stove did something no modern appliance dares attempt. It kept cooking after you turned it off. That was not a gimmick. That was engineering genius wrapped in cast iron and chrome. Born in the early 20th century, the chamber stove became a quiet sensation in post-war homes for one incredible reason. It cooked with the gas turned off. Thanks to thick insulation and a sealed oven chamber, you could roast an entire chicken, switch off the flame halfway, and let retained heat do the rest. It was efficient, elegant, and oddly futuristic. And while it lacked a touchscreen or a clock, it came with something more valuable: trust. People swore by it. Some still do. The stove's signature thermowell let you slow-cook soups and stews deep inside a lidded metal pit while you handled the rest of your day. The burners had griddles built right in, and the oven door sealed tighter than a vault. It made people feel clever, like they were cooking smarter, not harder. But in the rush for newer, faster, shinier appliances, the chambers was quietly pushed aside. Too heavy, too bulky, too slow. Or so we thought. Why did we stop believing that doing more with less was the smartest design of all? Harvest Gold was never meant to be subtle. It was loud, it was proud, and for one strange decade it coated every surface of the American kitchen. Paired with avocado green or orange, it was not just a color, it was a statement. You would find it on fridges, ovens, mixers, even your mom's favorite Tupperware. Advertisements promised it would bring warmth and cheer. But step into a Harvest Gold kitchen today, and it feels less like nostalgia and more like stepping inside a mustard bottle. The brightness that once felt cheerful began to feel aggressive, like a room that never let you relax. It faded fast, stained easily, and always seemed to clash with whatever came after. Like avocado green, it was an attempt to blend nature and futurism, and it failed at both. Once natural light hit a harvest gold refrigerator, the whole room seemed to glow with the hue of old mustard. Families tried to modernize around it, but nothing could mute the glare. And when the 80s arrived with chrome and pastels, harvest gold became the aesthetic equivalent of showing up in bell-bottoms to a wedding. Still, at least it stayed in its own space. The next design trend went everywhere and reflected everything. It was the original shortcut for busy kitchens, long before microwaves or DoorDash deliveries. Right there in the wall, usually between the kitchen and dining room, was a little opening known as a pass-through window. Not big enough to walk through, just big enough to pass a steaming pot of mashed potatoes or a stack of plates. It was part convenience, part conversation starter, and part dinner-time drama stage. You could poke your head through and call out, "Who wants seconds?" Or you could slide a dish over without juggling it across the carpet. In bigger homes, they were framed out in wood or tile with little ledges to rest a casserole on. In smaller homes, they were purely functional, a hole in the wall that saved mom 10 steps at every meal. Some even had shutters or swinging doors, so you could close the kitchen once dinner was served. But eventually, open-concept living took over. People tore down the wall entirely instead of carving a window into it. And just like that, the pass-through became passé. Still, it had its charm. It turned dinner into a kind of performance. But if passing potatoes through a hole in the wall sounds odd, imagine burning your garbage in a machine tucked right next to the toilet. Blank VHS tapes were not just empty plastic boxes. They were treasure chests, the kind you could label, relabel, and fill up with your own little corner of television history. You remember the sound, right? That whirring click as the VCR accepted your latest recording project, whether it was The Muppet Show, a Disney movie airing on Saturday night, or just some random commercials you ended up watching later like they were rare artifacts. Back then, taping something off television was serious business. You had to time it perfectly, hit record at just the right moment, or risk catching the tail end of a news anchor saying, "And now," before your show started. Fast-forwarding past commercials felt like a power move. Rewinding? An art form. And if you had one of those little tape rewinder machines shaped like a car, you were basically living in luxury. You wrote on those little white stickers with a level of care that rivaled school projects. Do not tape over. Disney only. Toys R Us ad. Keep forever. And when someone in the house recorded over your stuff with a football game, that was war. But if you wanted to really test your patience and your brain power, there was only one screen-based challenge that ruled them all. Before Bluetooth speakers and smart home assistants, there was the built-in wall radio. Usually installed near the phone nook or tucked into a panel above the kitchen counter, this was your portal to the world. With one turn of a giant knob, you could get the weather, farm reports, school closings, or your favorite midday jazz station. Some had small intercom buttons for calling upstairs or out to the garage. It was kitchen multitasking before anyone used the word. Moms would hum along while stirring soup or call the kids for dinner through the built-in speaker. You knew what time it was by the voice on the radio, not your phone. It was the soundtrack of daily life, soft static, local news, and old familiar jingles. Even the quiet moments felt fuller with it playing in the background. But as media moved to TV, then to handheld devices, these built-ins became obsolete. Wires were cut, faces painted over. Now, if you find one in an old house, it looks like a forgotten control panel from a spaceship. Once, it brought life into the kitchen. Now, it is just a silent square on the wall. We carry entire sound systems in our pockets today, but they do not echo down the hallway the same way. What did we lose when the kitchen stopped singing? The Wedgewood Stove was not just a kitchen appliance, it was the beating heart of the American home for decades. Heavy, reliable, and proud, it stood with cast-iron confidence in countless kitchens from the early 1900s through the 1950s. With gleaming enamel and solid chrome accents, the Wedgewood Stove represented stability in a world that was often anything but. It was the kind of machine you could count on through hard winters, power outages, and the leanest of times. When families were short on money but rich in hunger, this stove never flinched. It baked Sunday roasts, stewed apples, and slow-cooked beans with a steady heat that felt almost alive. It came in colors that matched pastel tiles and checkerboard floors, and it was often the first thing people noticed when they walked into a kitchen. Over time, styles changed, kitchens modernized, and stainless steel took over the spotlight. But even now, those who remember a Wedgewood stove in their childhood kitchen remember the smell of cinnamon, the clank of iron, and the soft click of a door that never slammed. It was not smart, it was not sleek, but it was home. Why did we trade something so faithful for appliances that beep, buzz, and break in under 5 years? The step-down bathtub was supposed to bring spa-level relaxation into your home. Instead, it brought stubbed toes, twisted ankles, and more than a few emergency room visits. These sunken tubs looked sleek in design magazines, especially when surrounded by lush ferns and candlelight. But reality hit hard the moment you tried to use one. They were awkward to get into, nearly impossible to clean, and posed a serious risk to anyone with limited mobility. The edge was invisible to the untrained eye, so guests would stumble, kids would fall in, and elderly family members avoided them altogether. On top of that, the plumbing was often complicated. The water lines were hard to access, and the moisture around the recessed area led to mold problems. For a feature that took up so much space, the step-down tub delivered very little comfort in return. And unlike a regular tub, you could not just swap it out. It was built into the foundation. Expensive to install, expensive to remove, and all too easy to regret. But even if you managed to climb out in one piece, your next problem was likely waiting for you in the kitchen. The butter mold was once a quiet symbol of pride that lived in farmhouse kitchens and rural homes across the country. Before butter came in sticks wrapped in wax paper and stacked in supermarket coolers, it was made by hand, from cream churned for what felt like hours. But churning was only half the ritual. The real finish came when that butter, thick, golden, and soft, was pressed into a hand-carved wooden mold. These molds came in all shapes and designs: roses, wheat stalks, stars, initials. Some were simple, some were intricate, but all of them said the same thing. This was made with care. They were not just decorative, they were a mark of identity. In local markets and community fairs, families were recognized by their unique butter stamps. It was not branding, it was heritage, a kind of craftsmanship that was passed down like a recipe. Butter molds were rinsed, dried, and stored in the coolest cupboard. They were cleaned with a toothbrush, handled like treasure. Today, you will find them dusty on antique shelves, mistaken for cookie presses or quaint kitchen decor. But they were never just for show. They were the final touch to a process that took time, patience, and love. When did we stop honoring the beauty in what we used to make by hand? Walk into an old house and open a closet door, and you might get hit with a smell that is oddly comforting. Woody, warm, a little spicy. That would be cedar, not a scent diffuser, not a spray. Actual cedar wood, lined across the walls of the closet from top to bottom. These cedar-lined closets were the silent guardians of America's wardrobes. They protected against moths, mildew, and musty smells. But they also added a kind of rustic luxury, like storing your clothes inside a tree trunk at a high-end cabin. The idea was simple. Cedar wood naturally repels insects, so why not turn your entire closet into a bug-proof haven? People did not just store coats in there, they kept heirlooms, wool suits, and seasonal clothes safe year-round. Some closets were fully lined, others just had a single cedar panel on one wall. Either way, it gave the whole room a spa vibe long before that was a thing. These days, you might see cedar blocks or hangers sold in stores, but entire closets made of the stuff? That has faded into the woodwork, literally. The world got synthetic, and the cedar charm became a relic. But if you think that was clever, wait until you see how people used to pass food across rooms without ever leaving their chair. The electric egg poacher was the quiet champion of a better breakfast. Small, unassuming, and often overlooked, it sat tucked away in the corners of countertops, promising soft whites and warm yolks without a pot or pan in sight. You filled the base with water, cracked your eggs into the holders, and watched the steam rise slowly into a gentle cloud. It was perfect for those who wanted elegance without the effort. No vinegar, no swirling water, no chance of a ruined yolk. Just press the button and walk away. In a world full of toasters and coffee makers, it whispered, "Take your time." It belonged to the kind of home that played soft jazz on Sunday mornings and served breakfast on ceramic plates instead of paper towels. The poacher did not need to be flashy. It was consistent. It gave people back their mornings. And yet, it faded. Because poached eggs stopped being everyday meals. Because we forgot how nice it was to feel fancy before 9 in the morning. Now, most sit in thrift shops, unused and unappreciated. But for those who remember, one bite of that perfectly poached egg takes them straight back. When did we decide breakfast was no longer worth slowing down for? Behind the smooth cabinet doors of many mid-century kitchens hid a surprising tool, a pull-out dish drainer that lived inside the wall. After washing dishes, you would slide out the rack, load it up, and let everything drip dry behind closed doors. It kept counters clear, made the kitchen look tidy, and gave a sense of order that matched the rest of the house. Some even had small trays underneath to catch the water. It was not about hiding the mess. It was about making space feel peaceful. When plastic racks and countertop drainers became standard, these hidden drying systems quietly disappeared. New kitchens no longer had room for them, and they were hard to clean and prone to mold. But there was something thoughtful about them, something neat, something kind of charming. Now, we just pile dishes in the sink or leave them out for hours. The idea of drying dishes out of sight feels like something from a different era, one where appearances mattered, but so did small comforts. What else have we stopped tucking away for the sake of convenience? The cookie press was a piece of holiday magic that turned dough into art with nothing but a squeeze. With its interchangeable metal discs and ratchet-style handle, it could create dozens of perfect cookies in seconds, each one shaped like a flower, star, or tree. It was especially popular during the holiday season, when kitchens smelled of cinnamon and vanilla, and the radio played old Christmas tunes. The press made baking feel like a celebration. Kids would fight over who got to press the dough, and every batch felt like a tiny miracle. No rolling pin, no cookie cutter. Just one graceful push, and a perfect cookie appeared. The dough was usually soft and buttery, flavored with almond or lemon, and finished with a dusting of sugar or colored sprinkles. The cookie press was about more than efficiency. It was about beauty. It said your cookies could be delicious and delightful, but as store-bought cookies became more common, and as baking turned into a rare weekend chore instead of a family tradition, the press went quiet. It sits in the backs of drawers now, its discs scattered and forgotten. But for those who remember, it was a joy machine. When did we stop making food that felt like play? Sunburst clocks, brass peacocks, oversized metal sculptures of sailing ships. If it glittered and could be nailed to drywall, it was probably up there. Wall decor in the 1970s took the loudest ideas from mid-century modern and cranked them past 10. The sunburst clock especially became the crown jewel of every living room, often mounted above a fireplace or a sagging plaid couch. It was supposed to say, "Sophisticated modern family," but what it actually said was, "Time stopped in 1973." These pieces aged fast. Dust built up in the corners. The faux gold finishes dulled. And eventually, people began to question why a clock needed 20 sharp metal rays stabbing out into their personal space. Like so many things from the 70s, it was a style built on boldness. And boldness is a hard thing to live with, especially when it came in shades of burnt orange and baby poop brown. The bread box was once as essential to the kitchen as the sink or the stove. A humble wooden or metal container, usually perched at the back of the counter, it kept loaves fresh in the days before plastic bags and preservatives took over. Its job was simple: slow down staleness and keep out pests. But its presence meant more than that. It meant you baked or bought bread regularly, that someone in the house cared about toast, sandwiches, or buttered slices to go with stew. Opening the lid released the faintest scent of yeast and crust. For kids, it was the treasure chest of after-school snacks. For adults, it was a silent reminder that home meant warmth. The sound of the lid closing, soft, final, was part of the rhythm of daily life. Bread boxes came in colors to match tiled kitchens and Formica counters. They had floral decals, chrome handles, and rounded corners that looked almost cheerful. Over time, though, as preservatives lengthened shelf lives and bread became an afterthought, the box disappeared. Modern kitchens left no room for something so quaint. But in losing it, we lost a ritual. A quiet pause in the day. When did bread stop deserving a place of its own? Once upon a time, you did not just decorate your bathroom, you committed to it. We are talking full-color, floor-to-ceiling, single-shade devotion. Pastel pink, mint green, baby blue, or the ever-famous avocado, these were the color-coordinated bathroom suites of the 1950s through the 1970s. And when we say coordinated, we mean everything. The toilet, the tub, the sink, the tile, sometimes even the toilet paper, matched like a showroom display. First Lady Mamie Eisenhower helped popularize the trend with what people dubbed Mamie Pink. Entire homes were built with these candy-colored palettes baked into their bones. But of course, color trends change. What once looked stylish and luxurious now feels a bit like stepping into a cartoon. As minimalism took hold in the 1990s and 2000s, bold bathroom hues were slowly wiped away, replaced by whites, grays, and beige. Still, those vivid bathroom suites had a kind of joy to them. They made you feel something, even if that something was confusion. And if the color did not impress you, the next home feature definitely would, especially if you ever hated carrying a heavy laundry basket down the stairs. Made-for-television movies in the 1980s were not just filler. They were events. Whole nights were planned around them. When that promo would come on, this Sunday, only on ABC, you would perk up, lean in, and make mental notes to not miss it. This was before DVR, before pause buttons. You missed it? You missed it. These movies had titles like The Day After, V, The Final Battle, or The Ewok Adventure. Some were tearjerkers, some were thrillers, some were straight-up terrifying, and they had you glued to the screen, wondering how they managed to squeeze so much drama into 2 hours. Plus, commercials. Families would make popcorn, dim the lights, and treat it like it was an actual premiere. You watched it live together, and you talked about it the next day at school. Because chances were, everyone saw it too. They hit different. The music, the narration, even that grainy picture, it all added to the mood. You were not just watching, you were part of something. And right in the middle of those movies came the strange intermissions, ones that could go from innocent to haunting in 5 seconds flat. The hand crank egg beater was a rite of passage. Long before mixers plugged into walls, children stood on stools beside their mothers, gripping the cool metal handle and turning the crank with both hands. The beaters would spin in a blur, blending sugar, eggs, and flour into the thick beginnings of birthday cakes and pancake batter. It was not efficient, but it was intimate. You felt the recipe coming together. Your arms grew sore, but your heart grew full. The egg beater did not make noise. It did not break. It did not ask for anything but effort. Every kitchen had one, usually tucked in a drawer next to the wooden spoons and measuring cups. Its clinking metal gears were as familiar as the smell of vanilla extract. And somehow, everything tasted better when it had been beaten by hand. Then came stand mixers, food processors, and digital timers. The crank beater was cast aside as outdated, inconvenient, old. But in that loss, something human disappeared. Now it hangs on antique shop walls, a symbol of effort, patience, and care. It taught us that food was not just made, it was earned. Why did we stop believing that some things are better when you feel them in your bones? A countertop garbage chute might sound like science fiction, but it was once the definition of practical design. Picture this: a hinged square in the middle of your kitchen counter that popped open to reveal a direct drop into the trash bin below. You could chop carrots, peel potatoes, and then sweep the scraps in one motion. No fiddling with a trash can lid, no extra step. Just a quick flick of the wrist, and it was gone. In mid-century kitchens, these were genius, especially when you were making big meals and needed all the counter space you could get. It made cleanup feel like part of the flow, not an afterthought. One swift motion and the mess was gone before it had time to become a problem. But eventually, people began to worry about smells, pests, and hygiene. Builders stopped including the feature, and home cooks grew wary of having an open hole in the counter, even if it had a lid. Most of them were sealed shut or removed entirely during remodels. Today, you will only find them in untouched kitchens from the 1940s or 1950s. They are almost always covered in laminate or chrome trim, like a forgotten piece of spaceship tech. What other clever shortcuts have we erased without even realizing it? The hand-crank food mill was a quiet champion in kitchens before electric blenders buzzed their way into dominance. With its simple design, a bowl, a blade, a hand crank, and a strainer, it turned soft vegetables and fruits into smooth purees with nothing but elbow grease. It did not need a plug. It just needed patience. You would place tomatoes, apples, or potatoes inside, then turn the handle slowly. Seeds, skins, and lumps were separated out, leaving a velvety mash that tasted more honest than anything a blade spinning at 10,000 rotations per minute could produce. It was ideal for baby food, applesauce, mashed potatoes, and tomato paste. And when you used it, you were not just cooking. You were tending. You were shaping food into its gentlest form. You felt connected to the process. And maybe, just maybe, the food tasted better because you worked for it. As technology took over, the hand-crank mill faded into storage, its quiet rhythm replaced by roaring motors and flashing lights. But in some kitchens, it still lives, reliable, low-tech, and full of dignity. It is not fast, it is not sleek, but it reminds us that sometimes food is better when made slowly, one turn at a time. Chainlink curtains swept into homes with all the glitz of a disco ball. Made of dangling metal loops, they sparkled, shimmered, and promised a modern, open-concept elegance that felt straight off the pages of a designer catalog. They were hung as room dividers, doorway accents, or even statement walls. The problem was, they never quite worked as advertised. The links tangled constantly. They snagged on sweaters, jewelry, and even hair. Pets would get stuck in them. Toddlers could pull them down. And for something that looked so sleek in showrooms, they sounded awful. Every movement produced a rattling metallic hiss, like someone jangling keys for attention. Cleaning was next to impossible. Dust clung to the chains like it had paid rent, and good luck wiping down hundreds of tiny metal rings. Over time, the shine wore off, the links dulled, and the novelty wore thin. What had once been stylish soon felt like living inside a giant wind chime. But just as these decorative dividers were quietly being retired, another trend had already taken root in suburban basements, one that involved steam, sweat, and a surprisingly low return on investment. The OKeeffe and Merritt Aristocrat range was not just a stove, it was a throne. Towering over every other appliance in the room, this 734-pound marvel was the ultimate status symbol in post-war kitchens. It did not whisper innovation, it shouted it. With twin ovens, broilers, warming drawers, and a built-in timer clock, it looked like something from a science fiction movie, only real. Housewives of the 1940s and 1950s dreamed of owning one. Advertisements called it the Cadillac of kitchen ranges, and they were not exaggerating. You could roast a turkey, bake a pie, broil steaks, and warm dinner rolls at the same time. It was massive, yes, but that size came with function. Wide enamel cooktops offered space for every pot and pan. The dials were thick, confident, and satisfying to turn. It felt like driving a classic car, slow, powerful, and designed to last forever. But time moves fast, kitchens shrank, stainless steel arrived, and the Aristocrat, once a dream, became too heavy, too large, too old-fashioned. Most were discarded during remodels, sold for scrap or left in garages like relics from a forgotten empire. But ask anyone who grew up with one, and they will tell you that stove made cooking feel like a ceremony. When did we decide that smaller meant better? You would toss it in and forget about it. That was the beauty of the laundry chute. A small hatch built right into the hallway wall or bathroom cabinet, leading straight down into a hamper, or sometimes directly into the basement laundry room. Just open, drop, and go. These vertical passageways were like magic portals for dirty socks and sweaty gym clothes. No more lugging baskets down 2 flights. No more arguments about whose turn it was. You just lifted the flap and let gravity do the work. Kids treated them like secret tunnels. Parents treated them like a godsend. But like many good things, laundry chutes eventually went out of style. Safety concerns popped up, especially with young kids and pets. And then there was the fire risk, as an open shaft could let smoke and flames move between floors. Add in the rise of compact laundry machines on upper levels, and suddenly the chute became obsolete. But admit it, there is still something satisfying about the idea of chucking a shirt through the wall. And speaking of walls, wait until you hear about the windows that were not exactly windows. If one of these machines sparked a memory, drop a comment, hit like, and subscribe for more forgotten treasures.